Hello and welcome to today's lesson. In the previous lesson we looked at homeostasis principles and the basics surrounding homeostasis. Today we're going to be looking at temperature regulation in mammals. So by the end of this lesson you should be able to recall the key structures of temperature regulation in mammals. You should be able to explain the homeostatic mechanisms used by mammals to cool down. And you should be able to explain the homeostatic mechanisms used by mammals to warm up. Okay, so if you could write the title, Temperature Regulation in Mammals, we'll make a start. So, we said in the previous video that optimum temperature inside mammals, inside humans in particular, is 37 degrees Celsius. So, optimum temperature for humans is 37 degrees Celsius. Okay? The reason for this is because it's so enzymes can work at their optimum rate. If they get too hot, they denature. If they get too cold, they do not have enough kinetic energy, which decreases the amount of successful collisions between substrates and enzymes, therefore reducing the amount of enzyme-substrate complexes formed. So we can say that optimum temperature for humans is 37 degrees Celsius. This is so enzymes can work at their optimum rate. Okay? Now, illness can cause your body temperature to rise to about 40 degrees Celsius. But if it rises any more than that, if it rises to about 42 degrees Celsius, this can cause you to die. That's very, very serious. Okay? So we can just say underneath here, because it's not that important, but we will add it out of interest, that illness causes body temperature to rise as high as 40 degrees Celsius, comma, but at 42 degrees Celsius, death can occur. So essentially, being at 42 degrees Celsius can lead to death. Under normal conditions, so if you're not ill, if there's nothing wrong with you in terms of your health, your body temperature will not vary no more than 1 degree Celsius. So under normal conditions, so we'll just put under normal conditions / health, body temperature will not vary from 37 degrees Celsius by more than 1 degree Celsius. By more than 1 degree Celsius. Okay? Now, your body regulates your internal temperature using something known as the hypothalamus. Okay? So the hypothalamus is our first keyword today. Hypothalamus. It can be defined as the part of the brain the part of the brain that monitors body temperature. Now, essentially, what happens is that blood flows through your hypothalamus. I'm going to take an image off the PowerPoint at this point, just one that I've taken from Google. I haven't sort of done anything special there. Blood flows through the hypothalamus found in your brain, which is just found at the top of your brain stem, just above your medulla oblongata, and it registers how hot or how cold your blood is. If your blood is too hot, it will bring about changes that cool you down. If your blood is too cold, it brings about changes that warm you up. Now, the hypothalamus sends messages via the nervous system. So it is controlled by the nervous system. So I'm going to add in red underneath. We're going to say that the hypothalamus controls or regulates body temperature no, so that should say regulates body temperature via the nervous system. Okay, so blood flows through your hypothalamus and it registers the temperature of your blood and decides whether it needs to bring about corrective mechanisms to warm you up or corrective mechanisms to cool you down. We'll write that here because I need some more space to the next bit anyway. So we can say blood flows through the hypothalamus which registers the temperature of the blood full stop. And we can say that the hypothalamus uses the nervous system to bring about changes to correct body temperature. So we can say that the hypothalamus then brings about corrective mechanisms via the nervous system. Okay? Now, your body temperature is constantly fluctuating. At some points it goes too high, and then at other points it goes too low. It is fluctuating around a norm. So it's worth stating here that the regulation of body temperature is an example of negative feedback. So I'm going to put in red finally on this slide that the regulation of body temperature is an example of negative feedback. Okay? So we've got that the optimum temperature for humans is 37 degrees Celsius. This is how enzymes work at their optimum rate. We've said that your body can rise to as high as 40 degrees Celsius when you're ill, but at 42 degrees Celsius, you're pretty much done for. You're going to die, okay? Under normal conditions or in normal health, your body temperature will not vary by more than 1 degree Celsius. So it will only ever rise to 38 and it will only ever drop to 36. This is in part due to what's known as the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a part of your brain that regulates body temperature. Blood flows through the hypothalamus and then it sends messages through the nervous system in order to correct your body temperature. So if you get too hot, if your blood's too hot, it will send messages through the nervous system to tell your body to cool down. If you are too cold, it will send messages through your nervous system to tell your body to warm up. The regulation of body temperature is an example of negative feedback. Okay? Now, unlike the thermostat in your house, because you'll probably do some reading, and if we were doing this in lesson, I would have used it as an example. Unlike the thermostat in your house, your hypothalamus has the ability to both warm you up and cool you down. Okay? Now, your central heating system only has the ability to warm a room up. Your hypothalamus is split into two regions. So we can put there are two regions to the hypothalamus. Okay, so there are two regions to the hypothalamus. There is the heat loss center. Imaginative, I know. The heat loss center. And this is a group of cells at the front of the hypothalamus which causes your body to cool down. So we can say that these are cells at the front of the hypothalamus that bring about mechanisms that cool us down. Mechanisms that cool us down. Okay? On the other hand, there are some cells at the rear of the hypothalamus known as the heat gain center. So number 2, the heat gain center. Now these are the opposite. So these are cells at the back of the hypothalamus. Cells at the back of the hypothalamus that bring about mechanisms that warm us up. So at the front of the hypothalamus, we've got the heat loss center, which brings about sort of things that help us to cool down. And we've got the heat gain center at the back of the hypothalamus that help us bring about how to warm up. So let's think now about how both of these work and what they bring about. Okay, I am going to refresh the screen so that I've got more space to use. Okay, so let's have a think now about how, let's have a think now about how we actually cool down. So let's put the subheading, what happens when the body needs to cool down? When the body needs to cool down. Question mark. So what happens when the body needs to cool down? Now, when we need to cool down, an increase in blood temperature stimulates the heat loss center. So increased blood temperature stimulates the heat loss center. In turn, this then sends out a message through the nervous system. So this sends out messages through the nervous system. Okay? Now, in this regard, the heat loss center acts as a coordinator. It receives stimuli, or it receives information and brings about appropriate responses. So this means that the heat loss center acts as a coordinator. A coordinator, okay? So a coordinator, we have spoken about when we looked at the nervous system, is a part of an organism that receives information and brings about appropriate responses. And brings about appropriate responses. Okay? So essentially, the heat loss center sends action potentials along neurons to effectors. So I'm just going to put underneath here that the heat loss center sends messages to effectors along neurons. So let's think now about how your body actually cools down. The first one that we need to talk about is through sweating. People who have me in class, you know, I sweat a lot. I sweat profusely. That is because I'm always working so hard and thinking about your education so much that I start to sweat by generating excess heat. Now, essentially, what sweating does is it releases a liquid onto the surface of your skin. Now, found on the PowerPoint slides, again, an image just taken off Google, is a picture of a sweat gland. We don't need it that big, okay? And essentially, you have millions of these on your skin, and what they do is they release a liquid onto your skin that we call sweat, which evaporates when it absorbs heat energy from your body, taking the heat energy away, okay? So we can say, next to sweating, that neurons cause sweat glands in the skin to release liquid. So you've got millions of these on your skin that all secrete liquid onto your skin. We can then say that the liquid absorbs heat energy from the skin becoming water vapor, or becoming a vapor. This vapor evaporates, taking away with it the heat energy from the body. So the vapor evaporates, taking with it heat energy. Okay? Now, sweating depends on humidity, okay? If there is already a lot of water vapor in the air surrounding the person or the organism, sweating will be less useful. So if you go to a tropical country, you find that, I mean, I've never left the UK, I don't know, but from what I'm told is that the sweat doesn't evaporate from you, it streams down your skin. Now, the reason it streams down your skin is because of the humidity in the air. So we can just put here that humidity will affect this. Okay? and humidity is the amount of water vapor in the air. So humidity is the amount of water vapor in the air. Amount of water vapor in the air. Okay. The second one we need to talk about is vasodilation. It's not the blue we used, is it? Vasodilation. Now, essentially, what we're talking about here is the word vaso. I'm trying to think of a colour we haven't got. Is blood vessels. So that means blood vessels. Look at that for the use of space. Mr. Abraham is so efficient. You've got to give me that. So vaso means blood vessels, whilst dilation means to get bigger. Or get wider. Okay? So vasodilation is when blood vessels near the surface of the skin widen. So blood vessels near the skin dilate, by which we mean widen. This means that blood will flow closer to the surface of the skin, and therefore more heat is lost via radiation. So an example of this is shown here. Okay? Probably going to have to use another page. Didn't want to, but it's the best I can do. So when heat needs to be lost, these shunt vessels will narrow, forcing blood to flow through blood capillaries near the skin. Okay? I'll have to move it in the middle for a second. Near the skin. This means that more heat is lost via radiation. So shunt vessels narrow, whilst blood vessels near the surface of the skin widen, dilate. These constrict, these dilate, meaning that blood can flow near the surface of the skin and heat is lost via radiation. So we've got the blood vessels near the skin dilate. We can say shunt vessels constrict, and therefore we can say heat is lost from blood vessels by radiation. This is why when someone is hot, their skin appears to be red. When I'm teaching you in school and I'm at the whiteboard and I'm all sweaty and I'm all animated and I'm writing and I'm, obviously I'm an entertainer, you can tell, I appear not only sweaty, but my face would be red. The reason my face is red is because I'm too hot on the inside. My shunt vessels have closed or constricted near the surface of my skin, and my blood vessels near the surface of my skin have dilated, allowing more heat to be lost via radiation. Now, an important point here is that blood vessels do not move closer to the surface of the skin. They simply dilate. The blood vessels don't move anywhere. Don't say in an exam, the blood vessels move closer to the surface of the skin. No, they don't. They just dilate. That is a common misconception. So I'm going to put in red that blood vessels do not move closer to skin. Comma, they dilate. So we've said that when you have an increased blood temperature, your heat loss center is activated. It sends messages to the nerve through the nervous system. In this way, the heat loss center acts as a coordinator, it's a part of an organism that receives information and brings about an appropriate response. So the heat loss center will send messages to effectors along neurons. When it sends these messages to effectors, effectors will bring about sweating, which is where neurons cause liquid to be released by these millions of sweat glands found on your skin. The liquid absorbs the heat energy from your skin and becomes a vapor. The vapor evaporates, taking away with it the energy. Humidity will affect this. Humidity is the amount of water already in the surrounding area. The higher the humidity, the less effective sweating will be. At the same time, neurons can cause vasodilation. This is where blood vessels near the surface of the skin dilate, while shunt vessels constrict. This means more blood flows near the surface of the skin and more heat is lost via radiation. Blood vessels do not move closer to the skin, they simply dilate. I'm going to have to clear this screen, however, we are carrying on with the same thing, because I haven't got enough room. I was hoping we would, but we haven't. The next one is hair lying flat. Okay? Air is an excellent insulator, but by lying flat, this means that air is not trapped near the surface of the skin, so there is less insulation surrounding the organism losing heat. So we can say that hair erector muscles relax, hair erector muscles relax, and hairs lie flat. And hairs on the skin lie flat. Okay? This means that air does not trap any heat near the skin. So air cannot trap heat by the skin. Some other ways that mammals cool down, these are not necessarily to do with humans, but they are to do with other ones. For example, would be thermal panting. Thermal panting. Dogs and cats and other mammals that have lots of fur cannot sweat. If they were to sweat, their fur would get damp and therefore they wouldn't be able to warm up if the temperature changes. You never see a dog after it's been running around with absolutely soaking fur because they do not sweat. So we can say that animals, or mammals even, mammals with lots of fur do not sweat. Okay? In order to cool down, they use something called thermal panting. And what this means is that some mammals, well, most mammals, have lots of blood vessels found in their muzzle. So this is a picture of a boxer dog, I think it is. And boxer dogs have, I call it a muzzle, I think that's what it's called. So this bit where their mouth and their nose is that sticks out, that is called a muzzle. I'm going to label that because it's quite important. Don't know what colour it stick out. So this is the muzzle. I don't know what you'd actually call that. I don't know what its actual name is, but I've always called it a muzzle. The muzzle contains lots of blood vessels. The majority of blood vessels are found in the muzzle of a dog and a cat. And essentially, if they get too hot, they start sticking their tongue out and going Yeah? Look at the image of the dog and imagine it going. Yeah, you can't see me at the moment, but I'm doing an amazing impression because I'm such a brilliant actor. Now, what this is the dog is pulling in cold air into its muzzle and then expelling the air very quickly. This allows a time where all the blood vessels in its muzzle can exchange heat with the cold air in its mouth, and then it gets rid of the hot air and brings more cold air in. So, lots of blood vessels in the muzzle. Quickly moving air in and out. Sometimes I hate how I write. In and out of the muzzle allows loss of heat from these blood vessels. It's much rarer for cats to do this, but I've got quite a few cats, and what I do is when I tease them and play with them and make them work for their dinner, essentially, once they get too hot, they start panting exactly like a dog will. Okay? Some other examples are organisms that go into cold water. I don't think I've got an image of that, no. So we can just put for this one, environment. We can say that when they're too hot, what's going on? When too hot, some mammals bathe in cold water. An example of this would be hippos. So hippos, when they're too hot, spend a lot of time in cold water to cool down. In fact, they spend most of their time in cold water. Okay? Right then. Final bit of today's lesson. I know it's a long one, apologies. That's just the nature of the beast at A level. Not a lot I can do. What happens when we need to keep warm? So what happens when when the body needs to warm up? Okay, so we're looking at the opposite now. So essentially, when we need to warm up, we have cold receptors in the skin detecting a drop in temperature. They send messages to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus sends messages through the nervous system to effectors. So we can say receptors in the skin detect a drop in temperature which send messages to the heat gain center. Okay. The heat gain center will then send messages through neurons to effectors. So we can say that this then sends messages to effectors through neurons. Right then. So we need to think now about different ways that we can keep warm. So the first one we're going to talk about is shivering. If you are too cold, you will start to shiver. What shivering is when the muscles inside of our body start to contract very quickly. So neurons will cause muscles to contract quickly. So neurons cause muscles to contract quickly. When the muscles contract quickly, they do lots of respiration and release heat as a byproduct. So muscles or muscle cells increase respiration, releasing heat. Okay. Now, this heat is passed to the blood, which can then pass it to the rest of the body. So the heat is conducted to other organs. So your body releases the heat via respiration, causing the rest of your body to warm up. The next one is vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction. Now, vasoconstriction is this other image that is a bit more blurry than this one. Plays with my OCD. Now, the opposite happens. When we said about vasodilation, the blood vessels near the skin dilated. We've now got the opposite. Blood vessels near the skin are now going to contract, while shunt vessels are going to dilate. That means that blood doesn't flow as close to the surface of the skin, therefore keeping heat in. You lose less heat via radiation. So we can say that neurons cause shunt vessels to dilate, and blood vessels near the skin to constrict. Okay? This means that blood doesn't flow as close to the skin and less heat is lost by radiation. So blood doesn't flow near skin surface, so less heat is lost by radiation. Next one, everybody's favourite. When you are cold, you get a hair erection. Hair erections. What this means is that hairs stand on end. When you are cold, your hairs on your body stand up straight. What this does is it traps a layer of air between your skin and the environment, which insulates it. So we can say that hair erector muscles contract. Neurons cause hair erector muscles to contract, and we can say that hairs on the body stand up straight, we can say that this traps a layer of air near the skin which insulates it. This traps air near the skin that insulates it. So that prevents the loss of heat. Okay? Now I have got a couple more examples and then we're done, I promise you. So I do need to quickly redo the screen. One that I thought I'd mention here is brown fat. Brown fat. Now, this isn't something that we have in our body, okay? We don't tend to have much brown fat. But some mammals, keep going the wrong way, some mammals, such as field mice, do, okay? Now, field mice will have a layer of fat that is called brown fat near the surface of their neck. Now, essentially, what these are fat cells that have lots of mitochondria. And when they send impulses from their hypothalamus, the cells, or the brown fat cells, rapidly oxidize fatty acids and release the energy as heat. The fact that this is found on the back of the neck of the mouse is that it acts like an electric blanket. When you go to bed tonight, you'll pull your blanket over your body, and that will keep you warm. By having the brown fat here, it releases heat that can travel throughout the body of the mouse. So we can say that brown fat contains more mitochondria than white fat cells. These, so the hypothalamus will send impulses to brown fat cells which oxidize fatty acids quickly. Which oxidize fatty acids quickly, releasing energy. Now, I might be wrong, but humans mostly have brown fat when we're a baby, and I think we lose it as we grow older. Don't quote me on that, but off the top of my head, I'm 90% certain. Okay? And that's why you very rarely see a baby shivering. A baby doesn't need to shiver because it has lots of brown fat, and the brown fat allows it to warm itself up pretty quickly if it's cold before it has the need to shiver. So we can say on this final bit that brown fat in the neck acts as a electric blanket. In fact, I'm not going to put electric. I'm just going to put acts like a electric blanket. Okay. Another way that you can warm up is through using hormones. So hormones such as thyroxine, I keep doing that. So hormones. So some hormones increase respiration. Think of adrenaline or noradrenaline. So some hormones increase respiration in cells, don't spell in with a C, in cells which generate heat. Okay, that's a fairly straightforward one. And we've also got things like the snow Arctic fox that I've got here, white fur, in fact, no, we're not going to mention the Arctic fox. I'm going to leave it at that. So, hopefully now you should be able to tell me the key structures of temperature regulation in mammals, so the parts of the brain. You should be able to explain the homeostatic mechanisms used by mammals to cool down, and you should be able to tell me the homeostatic mechanisms used by mammals to warm up. If you have any questions at all, as always, please contact me by the usual means, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.